please join me in welcoming Chlebowski.
There's a natural order to things. We could see it in the microscope, in the geometric organization of minerals, or in the patterns of human blood. It's in the Fibonacci sequence, found repeated ad infinitum in plants, shells, and seeds, and in the structure of the human nervous system. It can also be seen on the macroscopic level, in the mathematical organization of solar systems and the repeating spiral arms of infinite number of galaxies. And when we follow that natural order, what is natural occurs. When we move towards nature, there is coherence, resonance, harmony, and healing. However, when we move away from that organic order, what follows is chaos. When we manipulate and coerce natural processes to suit the whimsical minds of little men in power, we create disorder, chaos, and disease. You only have to have a slight awareness of pop culture to see the countless examples of this in movies and books, like Jurassic Park, Stranger Things, or any zombie movie. It's such a common theme that it plays out in the subconscious minds of the creative over and over again. Manipulating pathogenic DNA in the laboratory falls into this theme of disordering natural systems, as does obstructing holistic means of cure, as well as relying on and promoting treatments which are so far removed from nature that they actually cause more harm than good. And they all have devastating consequences, which we are all now too familiar with. I want to tell you the story of how I came to see the destruction of natural order in SARS-CoV-2 and why I'm up here tonight talking to you this evening. Then I want to give you an update on where we are with COVID. And then I'm going to lay out how I believe we need to prepare moving forward in regards to the biggest imminent threats that I believe we're facing. So here's the backstory, and forgive me if you've already heard this part. I know that many of you have, but I think it's important here. In early 2019, I became aware of what was being called a novel virus out of China. And I spent 6 lonely weeks researching, studying, and preparing for what I perceived was going to be the big one. The deadly pandemic that I had been suspecting would eventually come along. I felt I was out in front of it as much as I could be, and we began early and aggressive treatment with all of our patients. In January 2019, I treated perhaps the first case in the Western United States of a young boy with multi-system inflammatory syndrome secondary to the virus. And everything was sort of moving along from a medical perspective. People were sick, but they were doing really well in our protocols. And then one day in May 2020, I was sitting at my desk when Natasha, our office administrator, appeared in my office door with a very concerned look on her face, and she handed me an unmarked plain envelope. Well, it was a letter from the Federal Trade Commission. In short, it stated that statements that I had made in a YouTube video, in quotes, in regards to treatment around Chinese medicine, homeopathy, and Western herbs, which appear to be helping many people with this infection. Those were my words. And that early treatment will likely change some outcomes as well as reduce the spread. Those were the things I said. The Federal Trade Commission then went on to say, it is unlawful to advertise that a product can prevent, treat, or cure human disease unless you possess competent and reliable scientific evidence, including, when appropriate, well-controlled human clinical studies. Oh good, the irony is not lost on you. And for that COVID-19, no such study currently is known to exist. Thus, any coronavirus-related prevention or treatment claims regarding such product are not supported by competent and reliable scientific evidence. You must immediately cease making such claims. So what we did in a panic was take down that YouTube video. And I lost a fair amount of sleep that week, but nothing compared to what would follow. Because a week later, I got a letter from the Oregon Department of Justice telling me that I was under investigation and was to appear in court in Portland in July to substantiate my claims. It was at this point I realized something was very rotten in Denmark. I realized this was not about a virus. I wasn't selling anything. I wasn't packaging snake oil. I was offering solace and information to people that were scared and worried and rightly as concerned as I was. And then in that following week, the Department of Justice turned off the credit card processing machines of several of my Oregon colleagues for the same type of infraction. I spoke with these other panic practitioners, and we were all very worried. I realized this was a forward advancing attack on early treatment and prevention. At the time, I had my suspicions about why, but I really did not understand the scope of what was going on. And of course, over the last 3 years, we have all watched how this agenda has played out under the pretenses of a virus. Catherine, of course, will speak at length about what we know now and what we didn't know then. So this experience, fortunately, framed COVID in my mind for what it really was. And I am grateful for that. It ripped back the curtain to show me the little wizard. Because at the end of the day, I'm just a physician who took an oath to keep my patients safe and provide counsel for people who come to me needing answers. And that's what I did for the last few years, and what I'm doing now, and what I'm going to continue to do until I take my last breath. And because of that, I'm going to say some unpopular things tonight, because I feel it's my duty. So where are we currently? Though we stopped counting a long time ago, I believe our office has now somewhere treated around 1,000 cases of COVID. And because we followed those rules of nature, we have not to this date lost a single patient. We now have hundreds of cases of long COVID, and that number is growing every single day. And now I think we have somewhere between 60 to 75 cases of injection injury, and that is also growing every week. And I believe will dramatically outpace the other two issues in a logarithmic fashion in no time. Does that magnitude of numbers land with you in the way that it does with me? I mean, we're just a little naturopathic office in Southern Oregon. If you extrapolate that out, how big are those numbers? We, of course, are still treating several cases of COVID a week, and this will continue for many years to come. For the most part, COVID these days is much easier on the majority of patients, though some are still having a tough time of it. For people who haven't gotten COVID before and who did not receive the injections, the ones who have the toughest time are still the people with the largest body burden of toxicity. People with metals, microplastics, chlorine and other halogenated compounds, mycotoxins, the byproducts of jet fuel, glyphosate and other organophosphates, and dry cleaning solutions in their tissues, predictably over and over again. And I know because we check these in our patients. And as much as people who generally like to take care of their health, as I know you do in this room, I assure you, all of you have varying degrees of these compounds in your systems. This is a serious point to consider that I'll get to a bit later. So what's the long game with COVID for all of us with this information in mind? Because COVID isn't going anywhere, and even uninjected people are getting this more than one time. And here is unpopular opinion number one, or as I like to call it, how to make sure you have lots of me time at the cocktail party. I do not believe the answer is to stockpile ivermectin, or just take unabated N-acetylcysteine and zinc every single day moving forward. This plan is weak in its longevity, and it does not take into account other viruses or dramatic mutations of this one. It also does not get to the root of why we get sick with viruses in the first place. I believe we need a more comprehensive defense strategy that I'll outline in a little bit. We're also seeing heaps of long COVID. These unfortunate people have varying degrees of fatigue, pain, neurological symptoms, including brain fog, loss of smell, headaches, vertigo, autonomic nervous system distress, and gastrointestinal symptoms, to name a few of the more common issues that arise due to the long-term effects of this very novel virus. Because of the fairly high prevalence and debility associated with this disorder, my primary recommendation is still, as it has always been, to take COVID seriously and to treat it aggressively and thoroughly till the end, until every single symptom is gone. Do not let symptoms linger. Go get help. If you know people who are struggling, the FLCCC protocols are still a decent leaping off place for people. The unfortunate cases arise when someone is not helped by these protocols, which is of course not uncommon in my office. So here comes unpopular thing number 2. As much as I don't like saying this, due to the unique and unusual nature of COVID, protocolic medicine does not work very well in general for long COVID. And if they haven't already left, this is where most of the people in the group I'm talking to at the party leave me to stare alone at the rapidly melting ice cubes in my Manhattan. But with medicine in general, protocols are always less effective than individualized care. And that in and of itself is one of the largest reasons why we're in this place right now with our broken healthcare system. One-size-fits-all medicine does not work. So let's not do it on our side either. Let's not carry that forward into the new paradigm. So why don't those protocols work in many people? There's 2 reasons I perceive. One is because COVID, like all viruses, hits you in your Achilles heel. If you have chronic, albeit quiet, gastrointestinal parasites, you might develop GI symptoms with long COVID. If you have a leaky blood-brain barrier due to hypertension or mercury toxicity, you might get chronic migraines or brain fog with long COVID. If you have adrenal fatigue and hypothyroidism secondary to mold toxicity, you might not be able to get out of bed after COVID. And if you have subclinical Lyme disease, you could end up with joint pain from long COVID. So these people need more specific help through COVID itself and also through the long COVID. Reason number 2 that people are failing these protocols, because if you are full of toxins, as most people are, and you don't address the toxicity, which these protocols do not, but in a very cursory way, you can stay very, very sick. See, the toxicity perpetuates the inflammation. It allows the chronic background infections to flourish. Toxicity blocks detoxification itself, damages circulation, inhibits endocrine function, hurts the gastrointestinal health, destroys cardiac function. So the toxicity has to be addressed. Otherwise, we're just stuck in this loop. And despite these two main points, I realize many people do not have access or the means to doctors. So in those instances, point them to the FLCCC. And familiar as that organization is to the group of us here, most Americans have never heard of them. They have no idea. Because the captured legacy media propaganda machine will not tell their story in a favorable light. As a curiosity, I would love to see a show of hands of how many people have noticed the increase in sirens. Good, that's more than I thought. I'm an inherently nervous father and a physician in that order. So I instinctively pay attention to sirens. I have the entire time we've lived in Ashland. My home and office are downtown. You cannot not hear them. And if you worry about your kids as much as I do, you pay attention to sirens. It used to be if you heard 2 sirens a week, that was about twice as much as you were used to hearing. We have this free app on our telephones in our office. It's called Pulse Point. We look at it all the time. I look at it every day. We now, on average, have 8 medical emergencies a day in our little town of Ashland. 8 times the ambulance has to go somewhere for a medical emergency. That's an average of 1 every 3 hours. We hear sirens all the time. So why? When you don't know the answer to something, you need a hypothesis. I have a hypothesis. The experimental injection injured phenomenon. This group has been showing up in our clinic since a few months after its introduction, in the midst of its phase 3 trial. And these cases, as you can imagine, are messy. So far, I have personally seen immune system depression, autonomic dysfunction, that means dysregulation of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system in people, new onset of and reactivation of autoimmunity, carcinogenic effects. There's been a definitive uptick in cancers and some very rapid onset cancers. Mast cell activation, that means histamine. The body's on fire. Blood-brain barrier damage, cognitive issues, vertigo, multi-organ system damage, reactivation of latent infections, and systemic inflammatory syndromes. I'm sure there's some more things that I have forgotten in the whirlwind of trying to deal with COVID and long COVID and the injection injury, in addition to all the other health problems that people have. When people get the injections on top of long COVID, those are the messiest. These people are really sick, and these are complex cases. And not everyone who gets injected is sick. Not everyone who received the injections does their blood look bad. You know, you see this now if you go on Rumble or Telegram, these people that do dark field microscopy, which is something I also do, and they say things like, every single person's blood looks terrible. It's not true. It's baloney. I look at every single one of my patients' blood, and not everyone's looks bad. I think there's a variety of reasons for this, and if we have time, we can talk about that later. I have theories. Most unpopular thing I say these days. We need to stop saying and focusing solely on the detoxification of the spike protein. Why? Because I think it's simplistic and frankly somewhat misdirected. And we don't have any way to objectively track if you have more or less spike protein after treatments. I'm not saying some of these things aren't worthwhile, N-acetylcysteine, black cumin seed, pine needles, but we can't actually track the amount of spike in the body. And whenever I say that, people point me to antibody studies, which is sort of like a sideways look at the presence of something in the body. I found one study, called Monitoring Serum Spike Protein with Disposable Photonic Biosensors Following SARS-CoV-2 Vaccination. And it's sort of the closest one I could find, but even after I read it, I'm not convinced that they're not just looking at antibody response to the spike protein. So if we can't track it, how can we say we're detoxing it or it's going down? Additionally, the spike isn't the problem in a lot of cases, I can tell you. The problem is the Achilles heel effect, which I described earlier. The problem is mast cell activation. The problem is downregulation of p53 leading to cancer. The problem is inactivation of T cells. The problem is molecular mimicry, bystander activation autoimmunity, epitope spreading, cryptic antigens, all sorts of autoimmune processes. And this could be from graphene oxide. This could be from G quadruplexes. This could be from lipid nanoparticles. It could be from any number of things. And I personally think a hyperfocus on the spike protein is distracting. And I also think some people are just trying to make money on selling people things that they don't necessarily need. I have not focused, directed any attention, put any effort whatsoever in a single one of my long COVID or injection-injured patients towards detoxification of the spike. None, not a nil. And these people are getting better. And I'm completely willing to accept that I may be off the mark on this one, but it's just where it looks like to me from where I stand now. I think more importantly, though, let's try and help these people by spreading good information and providing resources to people who don't read the same things that we do and don't do the same type of research that we do. Okay, so what about solutions? So what is coming and what can we do about it? I think the whole agenda that Catherine is going to talk about has so many parts. But from my perspective, I see at least two clear and present dangers in front of us. There is no doubt there are more, but there are two I feel very confident are heading our way. And after I explain them, I would like to present what I think is a reasonable, overlooked, and neglected way to prepare for both of these eventualities in one fell swoop. Two birds, one seed. Number one is our ability to resist without caving in the face of impending governmental overreach. Can we all be strong enough to say no when the time comes? When you are unable to buy food, drive your car, pick up your prescription, go to the bank, go to work, be seen in the hospital, or any number of the other things you haven't been updated, logged into, facial recognition scanned, or consented to social credit score backed digital ID system that will be tied to your compliance, can you stay strong and say no? No matter what crisis comes to usher it in next, be it another virus, COVID 2.0, war, energy crisis, whatever it is, can you be self-sufficient to be able to resist long enough until the system is destroyed? Until we take down the Death Star? That is threat number one. The second obstacle will be the Earth changes. One thing we can say with confidence about climate is that it changes. It has always changed, and it will always continue to change. Not long ago, Egypt was under an ice field, and the North Pole was a jungle. And this is not science fiction, and this is not hyperbole. We are at the end of a 12,000-year cycle on our planet. And what happens roughly every 12,000 years on Earth is that the magnetic poles flip, and then they flip back again. This is due to a weakening magnetic field on our planet as we move through the galactic current sheet. This causes changes in weather patterns, including volcanic activity, earthquakes, tsunami, tropical storms, and then ultimately large-scale rapid Earth changes secondary to massive solar events, including flares and coronal mass ejections. This has already begun to happen, as evidenced not only by the shifts in weather seen on our planet, but also by increased volcanic activity on Mars, and observable changes in our two nearest stars, Barnard's Star and Proxima Centauri, which have already gone through the sheet. When the poles flip, things are going to get wild for a bit. Be prepared when this happens to be alone, without your creature comforts. Be prepared to have every device you own fried and unusable. Be prepared to be without EMS and other support. Because when that thing happens, you don't know where you're going to be. You could have stored 3 years worth of food, batteries, weapons, gasoline, everything you want, but if you can't get to your home, what does it matter? What if all your supplies are destroyed in an earthquake? What would your single best defense in that situation, as well as the first scenario of massive governmental oppression, be?
Immunity.
That's a good one.
Your health. Immunity.
I think those are all excellent. I summarized it with the following statement. A clear mind, a rational and metered emotional response, and a strong and healthy body. How does the out-of-shape hysterical guy fare in the zombie or the asteroid movie? You've all seen it. Who is always the protagonist in the zombie movies? Ex-cop, ex-military. Someone's fit, lean, focused, and keeps their shit together under pressure. To bring this to a fine point, we need to be as strong and healthy as possible in both of these situations. In each of these sequence events, we need to have zero reliance on the Rockefellerian medical cartel. So how do we do that? Yeah. 4 simple pillars to remain sovereign in your health. 1, food. 2, exercise. 3, detoxification. 4, reduction of your unique pathogenic burden. In regards to food, I have an acronym in my book, Back to the Plow, PLOW. P stands for plants. We need to eat lots of plants. I'm not saying exclusively, but the greater majority of our diet should be made up of plants. L stands for low to no sugar. I'm not talking about fruit sugars, I'm talking about processed sugars. We should not be eating those things. They're not good for us. O is for organic. It's a foregone conclusion at this point. Our food needs to be organic. And W is watch the simple carbohydrates. Bread, rice, cereal, pasta, grains. Keep them to a minimum. Back to the plow. If you do that, that's a good foundation for a healthy diet that helps you take back your health. 2 is get fit. This means cardiovascular exercise 5 to 6 days a week and some kind of movement every single day. Cardiovascular means you're working your cardiovascular system. It means you need to be hard and sweating. Anything short of that is just movement, and it counts as such. You also have to do strength training. If you don't like weights, push-ups, sit-ups, planks, and squats. Push-ups, sit-ups, planks, and squats every day. Detoxify is number 3. Do something every single day to empty the bucket, because the toxins are not abating. We have an unending supply of microplastics and heavy metals in the air and the water. 5G, 6G, 10G, 20G, they're just rolling it out, and at some point it's going to be completely inescapable. And everyone is sensitive to EMFs to varying degrees. And unfortunately, as you become more toxic, you tend to become more sensitive to those frequencies. Many of you probably already know this, but the Australian government is beginning to use the mRNA platform to vaccinate all of the food-producing animals in their country. So I would speculate that within about 2 years from now, conventional meat sources will be off the table in our community. You might want to start raising your own or get friendly with people that do. There are lots of inexpensive solutions for detoxification that you can rotate through. It's incredibly important. And if you're not doing it, you're heading towards disease. Simple thing to do is to use low-dose binders away from food and supplements. Things like clay, charcoal, chlorella. You take these at night before bed, away from food and supplements. Low doses of liposomal glutathione. With both of these, listen to your body, go slow, be gentle, don't push through anything. Don't forget saunas and sweating too. Sweating liberates and expels mycotoxins, metals, and plastics. If you're going to invest in one piece of equipment to help with detoxification, sauna would be my first pick. It is arguably the single greatest tool we have for detox. Lastly, treat your chronic infections. This is unfortunately categorically ignored in most of medicine. It comes as a surprise to many people to know that they have them and that they can take you down when something else hits, like COVID or another man-made virus. I mean, be honest with yourself. Do you have chronic postnasal drip? Do you have sinus pain? You might have a chronic fungal sinus infection. Do you have a little cough every morning? Do you have chronic congestion? You might have a chronic lung infection. You have diarrhea or constipation? You likely have bacteria, protozoa, parasites, fungus out of balance in your gut. Get these things cleared up now. It's the time. I feel like we've got a few years to really get ourselves straightened out, to be lean, resilient, and immunologically strong. There's been a lot of talk in the last 2 years about creating parallel systems for people that will not go along with the agenda. In my mind, if we need to create parallel systems, one of the greatest parallel systems is for us to be completely self-sufficient in our health. To be prepared to be without medical assistance. I mean, what happens if you can't fill your hypertension or your thyroid medication? without being on the digital platform. To be strong and resilient against any virus they might release. What will you do when they release something a little more virulent than COVID? To be able to withstand a cold winter with little resources because you have mental, emotional, and physical strength. If we're going to be able to resist central digital bank currencies tied to compliance, you better damn well be in good health. COVID was a self-admitted litmus test. They used it to see what we'll stand for, to see what we're made of. And the reality is, they know they can bend most of us because we are weak and we are reliant on their conveniences. I don't know if you guys know this, but this difference between TikTok in China and TikTok in the United States. TikTok is owned by one of the largest and most important private companies in China. The Chinese government dictates, influences, moderates the content of TikTok around the world. They decide what children in China see on TikTok and what kids in the US see on TikTok. In China, the content for children is things like kids solving problems, children performing at high athletic levels, and working as teams. In the US, singing stupid songs with a cat on your head, seeing how many gumballs you can fit up your nose. I believe the last 70 years were intentional to prep us for this sort of thing. We are living in the prison state, and they must control the prisoners. So I say, what do you do if you're in prison? You do push-ups. All day long, every day. And yoga. Reduce your dependence on their toxins, their foods, their products, their websites. Then and only then do we become oppression-proof and unbreakable. I know that's not as a popular of opinion as stockpiling ivermectin, but I really believe it is more realistic and practical. Look at your addictions, your proclivities, and your weaknesses, and begin to address them now. The storm is rolling in. I mean, we are a tough bunch. After a time, we realized we could go without the things we thought we needed if they were going to force us to take part in an experiment. We realized we could give up travel, concerts, restaurants, some people their jobs, many people relationships. Good, robust health is your single best defense to survive anything they can throw at us and any coming earth changes. The other pieces of natural medicine matter too. These are the things that I'm using consistently day after day to get people through COVID, long COVID, and the injection injuries. The plants. Herbs are a great way to constantly bring balance and order into a system. Get acquainted with 5 to 10 plants that your body really resonates with. The ones that make you feel good and help you consistently over and over again. They are your allies. Plant them. Remedies. Homeopathy, flower essences, gemotherapy, isopathy. These tools are critical. Everyone's healthcare plan should include these gentle, safe, non-toxic, extremely effective tools for both acute and chronic issues. The other 2 shining stars in COVID have been hyperbaric oxygen and intravenous ozone. I have been so grateful for these therapies. They have helped people over and over again consistently. the fatigue of long COVID, the brain fog, the hair loss, the inflammation, it all falls with the application of intravenous ozone. If people are struggling with the fatigue of long COVID, tell them to find someone who does IV ozone. Frequencies are also going to be the answer too. Biophoton therapy, terahertz frequencies, scalar waves, photobiomodulation, biofeedback, Rife, Schumann waves. These things are really useful. They're going to help us combat the toxicities, the chronic infections, as well as heal the DNA of the injured people. That might be their greatest role in all of this. None of them are a cure-all. You still have to eat right, take the herbs, exercise, take the remedies. But they're really important. I suspect our fight has only begun. We are really only beginning to see the depths of the darkness that surrounds us. And I know at times that can feel terribly overwhelming. You can feel helpless in the face of such evil. I know I've had my times where I felt that way. But if at any time you feel that way, you can propel yourself forward by getting healthier, cleaning up your gut, facing your addictions, and making small steps every single day towards being healthier and therefore more resilient and ready for our next battle. Thank you all very much.